Pika. That guy who does things on the internet. That's me. I'm gonna read some stories today because, yeah, I feel like it, and hopefully someone enjoys. So, yeah, I'm gonna start with a fairly short one called "The Sense Twister" by W. Varick Nevins III. That's a name. All of these are things I've never read before, so it's I will be as surprised by them as you will, and perhaps even as delighted. Okay, let's start. The Sense Twister. There was a dull rumbling in the air, an unsteady footing as the floor lurched heavily from side to side. A swarming mass of humanity pushed by in a frenzy of speed. Louis Barton looked up from his magazine. He knew the subway well. He spent 3 hours a day in its nerve-wracking journeying. This was just another day. He would go to the office and work so hard that home for him was just a place to sleep. He did not even know most of the occupants of his boarding house. Here he was, 27 years old already, and all that life held for him was a dingy little section of a large office with subway rides and sleep in between. He longed to live a life of excitement like the hero in the story he was reading. Science fiction was his only escape from the dull routine. With it, he tried to drown his own life in that of the hero of the story. A genuine interest in science had been developed by his favorite magazine after a not too studious college career. Soon he was immersed in the final pages of the tale. As he reached the conclusion, he said to himself, "Golly, why can't something like that happen to me?" He looked across to the opposite seat, full of people with gum-chewing jaws and vacant, staring faces. They seem to be satisfied with life. But I am glad that I am different, he philosophized. There is not an atom of adventure or ambition in the whole car. Oh, for the days of the past or the future. The present is too monotonous. He looked out of the window at the next station and discovered that there were yet 6 stops to go. So he picked up one of the many discarded newspapers to glance through. It was open to the want ads, so he read these first. One in particular drew his attention because of its unusual tone. Wanted, adventuresome young man to participate in a dangerous scientific enterprise. No pay can be offered, much risk involved. Only those interested purely in the venture need apply. For further information, come Wednesday evening at 7:30 to 1436 West 10th Street. Ask for Dr. Austin. "I'm your man!" shouted Lou as he rushed from the car at his stop. This was Wednesday, and he had already planned to answer the advertisement in person. 3 of the gum-chewing jaws actually missed the stroke at the disturbance of the owner's semi-conscious state as Lou hurried away. If his work had seemed long other days, it now seemed as though minutes had changed to light years, if that were possible. Lou was not exactly sure what a light year was, but thought it suited his situation. However, all days have come to an end so far, and this one was no exception. Lou was the first one out of the office. Supper was hurriedly finished. Then he entered the subway for his new destination. Finally, it was 7:30, and Lou was ready to ascend the stoop of an ordinary five-story building. The first floor was a paint store, but above it seemed to be a cheap grade of apartment building. Many ideas sped through Lou's mind as he mounted the steps. What great adventure was in store for him? Perhaps he would have to give up his position. He had saved enough to last him about a year, and he would do almost anything for a change. The office was getting unbearable. Visions of journeys in strange lands, or possibly on other planets, assailed him as he rang the one doorbell in evidence. Almost before his hand was off the button, the door opened a crack, and a feminine voice spoke to him in a whisper. "Don't come in if you value your life. Heed this warning and go home in safety." Needless, needless to say, Lou was startled. This was the last thing he had expected. The warning promised more danger than he had bargained for. He quickly put his foot in the opening and forced the door open. A pretty dark-haired girl of about 20 was standing there in the dim light. There was a sadness about her eyes that told of a not too easy life. "Please," she begged, "don't come in. Go home while you may." "No," replied Lou. "I came in answer to the advertisement to see Dr. Austin, and I don't intend to leave until I have seen him. Is this the right place? Who are you?" "I am Lillian Austin. Dr. Austin is my father. He put the advertisement in the paper." "Then why are you so afraid something will happen to me? Are you afraid of your father? Tell me about it," coaxed Lou. "Shh," whispered Lillian. "Not so loud. My father might hear you. I don't know what has come over him recently. He seems to have been affected mentally. I am so worried." "Yes?" asked Lou, becoming more interested. "He has been working on a new invention that has used up almost all of our money. He thinks it is all finished, but I am not so sure. Dad has been acting so strangely lately that I would hardly know him. Now, please take my word for it and go home." "Not on your life," answered Lou quickly. "I am not going to leave anything that promises to be exciting. The advertisement promised thrills, and I am going to get them. If your father is mentally deranged, you should not be left alone with him. Will you take me to him?" "All right," was the dubious reply. "But don't say I didn't warn you." "Okay. I hereby relieve you of all responsibility for the person of Louis Barton." He grinned. She took him up one flight of stairs and then led him toward the rear of the building. "This is Dad's laboratory where he spends most of his time nowadays." She opened the door to a large, well-lighted room. The only items it contained were two hard chairs and an apparatus of some sort over which an elderly man was working. He started suddenly and covered the equipment with a black cloth. You should have knocked, dear, he said. Who is this gentleman? This is Mr. Barton, who has come in answer to your advertisement this morning. He wishes to talk to you about it. Ah, yes, yes, indeed, said Dr. Austin kindly. Won't you be seated? Mr. Barton? I am sorry the furnishings are not more complete, but my invention should remedy that as soon as the world knows about it. I shall call you when I need you, dear. This last to his daughter. Good evening, Mr. Barton. Don't forget what I told you. Oh no, that's what she said. Good evening, Mr. Barton. Don't forget what I told you, were Miss Austen's parting words as she left the room. Lou turned to Dr. Austen. Surely this man could not be mentally affected. His whole manner was so charming and kindly, his gray hair added a touch of dignity to his bearing. However, Lou decided he would watch his step. Dr. Austen's next words astonished him more than ever. You must not mind my daughter. It has been one of the greatest worries of my life. She has what you might call hallucinations. Generally, she is perfectly sane and normal, but every once in a while she develops a great fear without logical reason. I am telling you this in case she has a chance to talk to you alone. I do not want you to misunderstand. That is a shame, said Lou. You certainly would not think there was anything at all wrong with her. However, I'll try to understand if she acts queerly. So that explains it, thought Lou. Or does it? Which one is crazy, or are they both a little off? This is certainly interesting. I am inclined to believe the doctor. These thoughts left him in a quandary. So he decided, oh, so he decided to continue the conversation. Do you mind if we get down to the point? I am interested in what your proposition concerns. Will you please tell me more about it? Briefly, this is it, began Dr. Austin. I think I have discovered a liquid which, when injected into the bloodstream, will in a few minutes render all the body nerves very susceptible to ultraviolet rays and X rays. The sensations then received by the nerves may be controlled by these rays. A beam of X rays concentrated on a certain nerve will reverse the sensation received by this nerve. The ultraviolet beam will return it to normal. A combination of both rays will render the nerve senseless. I am afraid this is getting beyond me, ventured Lou. Perhaps I can make it clearer by means of an illustration, answered the doctor. Suppose I were to give you an injection and then subject your thumb to the X ray. In 2 or 3 minutes, the messages sent to your brain by the nerves would be the exact opposites of the facts of the case. Heat would give a sensation of cold, and vice versa. Pressure on your thumb would feel like suction. Do you follow me? Yes, I think I'm beginning to understand now. The ultraviolet ray would change the nerves back to normal. Would you have to use a new injection for that? Yes, the effect of the liquid on the nerves soon wears off, but the sensation remains reversed until the same process is repeated with the ultraviolet ray, thus bringing them back to normal. A combination of the two rays will deaden the nerve for as long as it is subjected to them. While Lou was listening to this discourse, he had an uncomfortable feeling of someone watching him. He turned around and looked in back of him. Oh, looked in back of him, but nothing suspicious was in evidence. He finally decided that his own nerves were not in very good shape. He tried to shake off his uneasiness by returning his attention to the doctor. "What are the practical uses of such equipment?" queried Lou. "Why, there are hundreds of uses," returned the doctor. "Suppose someone were to injure his leg badly. The surgeon would deaden the nerves while operating, thereby proving its value as an anesthetic. Afterwards, while recovering, the sensations would be changed by the x-ray so that the pain would become pleasure. In that way, some of the most crippled people in the world would be made the happiest. Of course, the apparatus will have to be used wisely to prevent misuse, but that is true of almost anything on Earth. Now that I have outlined one example, cannot you see the tremendous importance of such an invention?" "I surely do," agreed Lou. "It would certainly be a blessing to the world, but what part am I supposed to play in it? Why did you advertise for me?" Lou was still conscious of that feeling of prying eyes. Could it be that something else was happening in the house, something of which he had no knowledge? It was sinister. He again shook off his fears and listened to Dr. Austin. "The whole trouble with my equipment is that I have not tested it on a human being as yet. I have tried it on animals, but they cannot report their feelings to me. How can I tell whether the animal feels cold or hot when I hold ice against it? This major difficulty is to be overcome when I try it on a human being. However, that person for whom I advertised will have to be willing to take a certain risk. It may affect the mind irreparably. This would not be noticed in the animals I experimented on unless it were very definite insanity. Lesser mental cases cannot be easily detected in animals. My daughter offered to be the subject, but naturally any father dislikes the idea of using his own daughter as a subject for experimentation. Also, her hallucinations would probably make her report unreliable. Therefore, I advertised as I did. I have nothing to offer you. My last penny has gone into my equipment. You have a 50-50 chance of coming through all right. Are you willing? This is your last opportunity to refuse, as I intend to begin tonight if possible." This was just what Lou had been looking for, a new kind of experience. But now that it had presented itself, he was not so sure of himself. He thought over the matter carefully. Who was crazy? The daughter, or the doctor, or both? He rather trusted Dr. Austin, but then the daughter was in deadly earnest, too. What if she were right? Did she know something about the rays that her father did not know? Hardly probable. And what about this constant sensation of prying eyes? Suddenly, Lou decided, in spite of the price he might have to pay, he would go through with it. He answered the doctor's query. "I am ready to take the chance for science." "Good," said the doctor. "I shall prepare for the experiment." He went over and pulled the cover off the apparatus. Lou recognized it as X-ray and ultraviolet equipment of the very best type. Underneath was a sort of long couch. The doctor had his back toward Lou when a small sheet of paper was thrust quickly into his hand. He turned just in time to see the retreating form of Lillian Austin close the door. Lou glanced down and unfolded the paper. It was hastily written and difficult to read. This is your very last chance for life. Follow me quickly. I can save you. Now that I'm in it, I'll stay in, thought Lou. Her hallucinations are working overtime tonight. The doctor was speaking as he worked. This room is covered completely with a heavy layer of lead. Extra X-ray and ultraviolet rays would filter in and ruin the use of the injection, especially during the day if I had not taken the precaution. And now, my dear Mr. Barden, if you will be so kind as to step this way. Just like a movie usher, thought Lou. He stood up and walked over to the apparatus. Which part of my anatomy shall we use for the test? How about my tongue? It would be a change to taste sour sugar and sweet lemons. I wouldn't have to worry about biting my tongue, would I? It would be most enjoyable. I would have to be careful about whom I kissed, though. I might not be able to stand the agony. I am glad you are in such good spirits, my boy, nodded Dr. Austin. Please recline on the couch. I think you will find it quite comfortable. One finger will be sufficient for a preliminary test, I think. Are you ready? Okay, answered Lou weakly. He wasn't quite sure that he was enjoying himself as much as he had expected. Dr. Austin took a hypodermic from a container and held it poised over Lou's arm. He brought it down slowly and carefully pushed the plunger all the way in. Lou waited tensely for the result. Rest a few minutes for it to take effect, prescribed the doctor kindly. Then I shall start the X-ray treatment. Be sure to notice the results carefully. It all depends on you. It is still not too late to change your mind if you wish. No, sir, I'll go through with it, said Lou determinedly. The doctor started the X-ray machine and gradually brought it to bear on Lou's finger. One more moment and Lou would be experiencing something that no human being had ever known. That is, if it worked. How would this test affect his later life? It was about time for him to notice a change. That is enough, doctor. You win the bet, came a voice from the hall, followed by a tall, handsome, dark-complexioned young man. Lou sat up in surprise at this intrusion. I knew I would win, answered the doctor. May I ask what this is all about? Asked Lou, now on his feet. I bet the doctor that no one would be fool enough to answer an advertisement in which it was definitely stated that there would be no recompense and plenty of risk. As you see, I lost, replied the stranger. Tom has worded it rather badly, but that is the truth, continued Dr. Austin. We had an argument in which Tom said no one would be willing to be the subject in a dangerous scientific experiment without a lot of pay. I think you are an exceedingly venturesome young man. I like you for it. The world needs more people like you. Lou was a long time finding something to say. This was all quite a bombshell, and it had succeeded in scattering his wits. Finally, he was able to master himself enough to say, Well, I'll be. He checked himself just in time as Lillian entered. Well, anyway, she was not crazy. Neither was Dr. Austin. He, Lou, was the crazy one. To be made a joke of was no fun, especially after all he had gone through. He picked up his hat. How about the injection? He asked. Salt water, was the answer. Well, said Lou, you have won your bet. Now may I go? I must say I do not appreciate the joke. I won $500, ventured the doctor, and I would be willing to share it. Don't bother, said Lou abruptly. He turned toward Lillian. She seemed to be sorry for him. She would be good company, and he knew so few people in the city. Perhaps she would consider going out with him sometime. It would do no harm to ask her. This is Tom Brooks, my fiancé, introduced Lillian. He was watching from the next room. We are to be married tomorrow. From the doorway, Lou said an abrupt, Congratulations. The rumble of the subway the next morning accompanied Lou back to work. Good old science fiction, thought Lou as he took the magazine out of his pocket. It is more realistic than life itself, and far less disappointing. He unwrapped a stick of chewing gum and slowly put it into his mouth. A new jaw had been added to the chewing gum brigade. Yeah. That was an interesting story. Let's say. Let me see. Hey, oh, that didn't work. Hang on a second. Oh, that's me. Hello. Hello, me. Yeah. Hmm. Oh, there's literally no one. Well, that's an interesting thing. That's some bullshit, right? That's the only people I get in, in chat right now. I guess add to block list. Yeah. Okay. Should I read another story, or is it not worth it at the moment? Probably not. So, let's end it there for now. Yeah. Don't buy followers and viewers, by the way. It does nothing to help you. Um, anyway, yeah, I guess that's it for now. So, if I had like a couple of viewers, that would be worth continuing for a while. But I'm gonna stop for now. Have a good day, and if you are watching this after, I hope you enjoyed that story. That was not really sci-fi. It was the what do you call it? The veneer of of sci-fi. But yeah. Well, maybe next time. We'll see. Again, I've read none of these stories before, so it's just a random thing.